Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 197, IO 542a to b. Socrates has spent almost all the dialogue attempting to show Io that Io has no techne of rhapsody, no techne at all, and now in the concluding remarks he's saying that Io has to choose between two options. Either he has techne or he doesn't have techne. And we're still in the first option, that Io does have techne. And Socrates is saying that if Io does have techne, he is guilty of doing harm to Socrates because he promised to show Socrates that he is clever, that he has the techne, but he has promised and not delivered. He has deceived Socrates. And Socrates has just compared Io with Proteus, a mythical character who deliberately changed form as often as possible when caught by someone in order to escape and thereby not reveal any of his wisdom. And Socrates is accusing Io of deliberately concealing from him his sophia about Homer. This, of course, isn't the case. Io does not willingly conceal any of his sophia, but Io is gradually discovering that he doesn't have the sort of sophia he thought he had about Homer. He's agreed all along with Socrates that any of the content of the poems of Homer may be better explained and judged by experts on each particular subject, such as chariot racing, making a meal, a medical salve, or even leading an army. Socrates is now about to conclude this first option. Emen un technikoson, hoperdunde elegon, peri Homeron hyposchomenos epidexen exapatasme, adikos e. If then, although you are a technikos, that is someone with a techne, as I was saying just now, with regard to Homer, and although you promised to give a demonstration, you are completely deceiving me. If all of this is the case, then you are doing wrong. You are adikos, you are unjust. The problem with this claim is that Io actually did promise to demonstrate. He was offering Socrates a demonstration, and yet it was Socrates who said, this is very near the beginning of the dialogue, it was Socrates who said, another time, I have a question now regarding what you understand in Homer. The demonstration would have been on how Io delivers the poetry of Homer. Io is a rhapsode, after all, and not an expert on chariot racing, or piloting a boat, or healing someone who's sick, or leading an army. The techne of a rhapsode is the ability to convey the poetry of a poet to an audience in such a way as to produce the desired effect on the audience. Socrates has directed attention away from the actual performance of poetry to the expertise required to understand any particular subject matter within the poem. Io actually doesn't have any such techne. He does not understand the subject matter to that extent, let alone apply that understanding in practice. He is not a charioteer, he is not a doctor, he is not a pilot on a ship, he is not a general. The fact that Io did say at the end that he is a general is simply because he had run out of techne, and he was afraid that if he was not even a strategos, he would have absolutely no techne to speak of. In other words, Io himself was confused about the techne he actually has. Socrates, of course, is being unfair by accusing Io of willful deception. It isn't the case that Io willingly hides his techne about subject matter from Socrates. He simply doesn't have that sort of techne. And in that case, because he is not being willfully deceptive, he's not really causing any harm to Socrates. And Socrates, of course, knows this. It's still a question for us why Socrates is doing what he's doing. Why is he accusing Io of being deceptive, deliberately deceptive, and being unjust if he doesn't think this is the case? The obvious answer to this would be that this is the option he wants Io to reject, because there is the second option we haven't yet considered. Socrates is about to tell Io what the second option is. Edeme technikos ala theia moira katechomenos ex homeru meideneidos pola kai kala leges peritu poetu hosper ego epon peritsu uden adikes. But if you aren't a technikos, someone with a techne, but possessed by some divine portion from Homer, and knowing nothing, you say many and fine things about the poet, just as I said about you, then you are doing no wrong. The Thea Moira, the divine portion, harks back to the first major line of argument in this dialogue, where the magnets come into play, and there the power of the rhapsode comes from the power of the poet, which comes from the power of the goddess associated with that sort of poetry. The way it's being portrayed here, though, it sounds as though nothing the rhapsode says is said consciously, much like a prophet through whom the god or goddess speaks. This is the same Thea Moira which Socrates offered as his final answer to Meno in the dialogue Meno, whereby arete, virtue, comes to people no thanks to their own understanding, intelligence, knowledge, effort. It's all from the gods. The options here then are that Io has techne and therefore is harming Socrates, or he has absolutely no idea what he is saying, but he does say many fine things thanks to the gods, and therefore isn't harming Socrates. So on the one hand, if he had understanding, he would be harming Socrates because he refuses to show Socrates any of this knowledge, how he actually understands things. While on the other hand, if he doesn't know what he's talking about, then Socrates doesn't expect him to be able to explain what he says and why he says it. And this then is not harmful. So the harm in this argument boils down to a refusal to provide someone else with one's knowledge. If one has no knowledge to provide, that is all right. Heluun potera bule nomizithai hupohimon adikos aner enai e theos. Choose then which you wish to be considered by us, to be an unjust man or a divine man. Socrates really doesn't give Io much choice. Poludia fereo Socrates, polugar kallion totheon nomizithai. There's a lot of difference, Socrates, for it is by far more kalon to be considered divine. It's noticeable that Io doesn't even mention the other option. He would have had to say that it is more disgraceful to be considered unjust. We should also note that Socrates is once again giving leading questions. He has made Io think about how he is considered by others rather than how he should be in himself. He would much rather be considered divine by others than be considered unjust by others. We don't learn from this how Io actually regards himself. We do know from earlier on that Io didn't accept that he was divine. He protested at the time that he had spent a long time studying the poems of Homer. This was not something that just happened to him through the agency of a god. Tut toinon tokalion huparchesoi parhemin o ion, theon enai kai me technikon peri Homeru epaineten. So this more kalon thing exists for you among us, Io, to be a divine rather than a technical praiser of Homer. Again, Io's techne was not simply to praise Homer.